I was just giving a little bit of introduction as we are on the eve of Passover, and I was just letting everyone know that what we want to do is create a space here where we can have honest dialogue and get at some of the bigger issues that we find in our community. And so I want to thank you for joining us. Okay. So one more thing is if you are welcome, we're going to have the Q&A towards the end. You're welcome to ask tough questions as always, but there's one thing I will not stand for, which is impoliteness. So everyone must be polite. This conversation is done for the sake of heaven, and we do it to be polite and to learn more about each other. So welcome, District Attorney Boudin. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for coming to Congregation Beth Sholom on the eve of Passover and participating in our Lunch and Learn discussion. It's great to have you. As I've been explaining to people, the point of this group here we try to establish at our congregation is a space in the middle, a space for people to engage in honest and real dialogue so that we can get to know each other, as opposed to people staying off and huddling into their own bubbles and never communicating. So towards that end, we've been inviting guests, and we are privileged to have you here today. And so I'm going to begin by asking you a couple of questions. I'd love to get a little bit into your background, learn more about your Jewish upbringing and how your Jewish values inform your work. And then we'll have some time for some more questions. So thank you for coming and for participating in this conversation.
Thank you, Rabbi. And let me just apologize to everyone. I was trying to get on the Zoom link from about noon sharp. It took me about 10 minutes. I had to switch computers. Unclear what was going wrong, but I know we've all been there in 2020. It's a year that's taught us all new things about the capabilities and also the limitations of technology. So I'm glad to be here, and I look forward to being able to join you all in person, hopefully in the months ahead as we get vaccinated and reopen and are allowed by the doctors that make these decisions to congregate in person again, as I know we all would like to do.
Amen. Amen. And thank you, because that's what I have been talking about throughout the past year, is all of the things we can accomplish with technology, and then obviously some of the limitations. So I want to begin with a little bit about your background and some of the bio information that you provided us, which is really interesting. So you write that DA Boudin's commitment to promotion of social justice and the concept of tikkun olam stems from his early identity and experiences growing up in the Jewish faith. Personally impacted by parental incarceration and the failings of the criminal justice system, DA Boudin's career has focused on reforming the criminal justice system from the inside. And I think this is a good place just to set this stage and begin our conversation, because I think some people here might be unaware of your Jewish upbringing. And of course, as I mentioned, what we like to do at Beth Sholom is embrace the diversity of our tradition and the multifaceted, unique journeys that all of us take in order to discover what our faith means. And of course, with Passover beginning this ritual, this weekend, the rituals are focused on teaching our children and into the next generation. And so your story, I know, was formed by your experiences of Passover and Seder with your family as a young child. And I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit about those experiences and maybe begin with some of the lessons that you learned as a child.
Thank you, Rabbi, for that. And yes, I have four parents. The two that are my biological, my birth parents, both of them are Jewish. And when they were arrested, I was 14 months old. I ended up getting adopted by another family. And that family was part Jewish and part Christian. So I was raised both acutely aware of my own biological and cultural Jewish ancestry, and also in a family that embraced multiple different cultural religious traditions. I visited my parents in prison since before I can remember. I started visiting them quite literally before I could talk, before I could walk, and before I have conscious memories. My earliest memories are, in fact, going through steel gates, waiting in line at metal detectors, just to be able to see my parents and to give them a hug. I was very lucky that in my mother's prison, there was a openness on the part of the prison officials to the kind of cultural traditions that give us identity and keep families together. And so as a child, over the course of many years, I celebrated Seder inside the prison visiting room. There was a special ceremony that the prison allowed after normal visiting hours, and it was a dinner. It was a traditional Seder dinner, obviously absent the wine. But other than that, we had afikomen, we had all of the traditions and prayers and celebrations that we think of as part of a Seder. And I have vivid memories of that and of the conversations that a Seder dinner inside a prison visiting room forced me to have with my mother, with my adoptive parents, and with my broader community. I think your question was about lessons that I learned from those Seders and others I've celebrated over the years. I think the core lesson that I have taken from Seders is that the story of fighting for liberation, fighting against oppression and exile, is one that is tremendously empowering to us as individuals and collectively as a people. You know, there are so many beautiful, meaningful parts of the Seder. You know, the inquisitive approach that we take to every aspect of the retelling of our story, the literal singing that we are welcoming anyone without a place to eat or a home to be part of and to join our Seder. And of course, the gratitude that's expressed in the Dayanu. You know, there's a glory that we find on some level in seeing justice eventually happen, in seeing freedom at the end of a long road of oppression. And I think one of the most meaningful parts of the Seder for me is the portion after we read the 10 plagues, the description of, you know, throughout the Seder of the 10 horrific attacks the Egyptians faced, from blood to boils, even murder of their firstborn. And as we read through each of the 10 plagues, for each one, we dip a finger in and take out a bit of wine in honor of the Egyptians who suffered, to recognize that we should never take joy in seeing others punished, even when they deserve it, even when it's merited. Now, this lesson feels especially relevant to me in my role as district attorney. My job is not to be vengeful. It is to seek justice. And I can never lose sight of the humanity, of course, of the victims, of those who've been harmed, of course, always, first and foremost, but also the humanity of the accused. We can never forget to be compassionate.
And that's what our tradition ultimately speaks to, which is with this memory. The reason that the Seder is the most practiced of all Jewish rituals is that we are to remember being enslaved in Israel, that we too were slaves in a strange land, and to never forget that experience when we come into a situation or in a land in which we are in charge or we have greater power, to always remember those who are strangers. Now, before Mr. Boudin or DA, whatever, I'm not sure exactly how to address you, but before I became a rabbi, I went to law school on the East Coast, and I interned.
My sympathies. We all make mistakes. I said, my sympathies. We all make mistakes.
Well, you know, thankfully I corrected that. But I did intern for a summer in the Rhode Island Public Defender's Office, and I guess, like, you know, sort of like you, it was an experience where I admired the heck out of the Rhode Island Public Defender and everybody working in that office. But to spend a life committed to that system was something that I didn't know if it was for me. And obviously it wasn't. And I found another career path. And I think for the most part, people do understand that everyone deserves a right to a defense, right? And it's often that those of us who are less fortunate in our society are often the ones most in need of defending. But I don't think everyone here fully understands the work of a DA. So, and you know, you began here in San Francisco as the public defender here, and then now you're the district attorney. So I'm curious if you could talk a little bit about what your role is, what does a DA do? And then maybe a little bit about the transition from going from the public defender to the DA.
Absolutely. And thanks for sharing that bit of your own background as well as context. The role of the DA is, as I said earlier, to do justice. And what that means may vary from one person to another, but for all of us, it's a broad sense, it's a broad concept. most lawyers, as you know from your time at the public defender, most lawyers, whether public defenders or corporate lawyers, civil or criminal, have a client that they represent. And their ethical duty is to zealously advocate for their client's interests, whatever they may be. In the context of criminal defense, that means that you are, and this is what I did for many years, representing someone who has been accused of a crime, who is facing imprisonment, deprivation of liberty as a consequence for the crime they're accused of. And often it means advocating for someone who is in the lowest moment of their life, the deepest, most profound crisis. They've made the worst mistakes they'll ever make. And the question is what the consequences and long-term implications of those mistakes will be. In many ways, it's a simple and narrow and clear purpose because it's one person in each case that you advocate for. As district attorney, my obligation is much broader and more complex. It's to do justice. It's not to zealously advocate for one person, neither the victim nor the accused. It's to find a way that we as a society, that we collectively can give meaning to our values through accountability and healing. What that looks like depends on the case. We have a tremendous number of people in San Francisco who commit crimes, who cause harm against others, who suffer from mental illness, drug addiction, homelessness. That context, for me, is important as I think about what justice means in their case. And it always involves finding accountability that addresses root causes of criminal behavior so that we prevent future harm. It always means empowering and centering the people who've been harmed to give them a voice and to focus energy and resources on healing and on closure. That's the challenge.
But isn't justice blind, right? Don't we have this idea that justice is blind, that we don't have two sets of judicial systems, one for the rich and one for the poor? How do you reconcile that with I guess, redressing past wrongs?
Well, equal enforcement of the law is a critical part of my job, and it's something that I campaigned on. We need to enforce the law equally, regardless of the color of our skin or the faith or religion that we practice, the place we were born, how much money we have in the bank, or what our job title is. That's a real challenge in our society where privilege and class and religion play into power and politics in ways that we see as Jewish people every day. In ways that we have been oppressed throughout our history. So trying to level the playing field and enforce the law equally is a central challenge of my job. That's absolutely true. What it means depends on the case. I mean, look, a wealthy defendant will likely be able to pay for private treatment and show the court assurances that they're changing their life. They'll get a job, or they'll have somewhere to go on house arrest if they're released from jail. An indigent defendant may not have those things. And so we always have to balance the effort to level the playing field on the one hand with public safety on the other. And we cannot, in my role, create housing for the unhoused. We cannot create mental health treatment that doesn't exist. But we can and we do advocate for those things because we know, and I know, that they are essential if we are to build long-term safety, if we are to build a society that reflects the values we all share as San Franciscans, as Jewish people, as compassionate people, and that they're essential if we're to intervene when crimes are committed in ways that are effective and that change behavior to prevent the next crime from occurring.
Yeah, I want to talk about one of the issues that you ran on, which was, I guess, our prison system. And I think as we enter into Passover, we're asked to recall the cruel, the image of a cruel Pharaoh and the forcing of the Israelites to endure and to live in inhumane situations. Literally on Saturday night, we're going to be asked to taste, taste the bitterness of it. We actually have to taste the bitterness of that. And some of you might not know, less than a decade ago, the US Supreme Court ruled that California's prison system had grown to be so overcrowded that it constituted cruel and unusual punishment. And I think while many Jews are sensitive about social justice, sometimes there's a belief that if we just, if we don't do anything wrong, then the criminal justice system isn't going to get us. But we know that this isn't true for people of our community who are of color, who are disproportionately incarcerated. So my question for you is, what's the best way for people, maybe unlike yourself, who haven't been personally impacted by imprisonment, or who have known someone who've been imprisoned, who think, if I just keep by the laws, it's a fair system. How do we get to a more comprehensive understanding of that? It's fascinating just to hear you as a DA speak the way you speak. I'm from New York. DAs don't normally speak like you speak here. So that's weird. So it's unusual. And you're trying to get towards a comprehensive understanding of the system, including the reverberative effects that the justice system has on individuals and on families. So how do we understand that for those of us who haven't necessarily been impacted by it?
Rabbi, I was also born in New York, so we share that among other things. We were both born in New York, went to law school, and started off in public defenders' offices, and then made a change in our path along the way.
That's right. Came to this beautiful city.
Exactly. My oldest brother actually was born here, so in some ways it was a homecoming for me. Look, when I think about this, and maybe there aren't enough Jewish district attorneys, that could well be. When I think about this, I think about tikkun olam, to heal the world, the duty that we all have as people. I think all of us, even non-Jews, even Goyim, have the duty to leave the world better than we entered it. And that means, for me, that's a framework I bring to the criminal justice system and to criminal justice reform. I want to ensure that when I'm done with my term, or maybe it's more than one term, when I'm done with my work in this office, in this city, that the system works better than it did when I started, that it promotes fairness and justice and compassion in ways that are more effective than they did a year or 2 years ago. Now, so much of Jewish history is about this desire for public safety, right? I mean, my wife's father's family fled pogroms in Lithuania 120 years ago. They ended up in Africa instead of the United States, as my family did, fleeing very similar pogroms. Our history as a people, whether we went to Africa as my wife's family did, whether we went to New York City as your family and mine did, was about seeking safety and refuge.
That's
right. It's a huge motivator in what our history tells us and what I do every day. As I do that in this job, I do it based on data, based on empirical evidence, and based on a desire to seek justice and compassion, not vengeance or retribution. Those are the lessons that I bring from our history, from my own life experience, and that I try to put into practice in my office and the decisions we make every day.
But let me just follow up on that, because the Torah also says, "Thou shalt not steal." And I know that there are some who are concerned about recent developments, like Walgreens and CVS, who are no longer reporting shoplifting because they know that the people who are doing the stealing won't be prosecuted. And people blame you for that. Is that warranted? Is that justified? And the second part of that is, don't we have to penalize misdemeanors in some way?
No, it's not fair. And yes, we do have to penalize misdemeanors in some way. And we do. Look, since I took office, we filed over 5,000 new criminal cases, ranging from shoplifting, misdemeanor theft, all the way up to murder. Thou shalt not steal. And if you do in San Francisco, you'll face consequences. But to be very clear on what my role is, what the district attorney's role is, we cannot and do not respond to 911 calls. That's not our mandate. It's not what we're staffed or budgeted for. That's what the San Francisco Police Department does. And they have a difficult job. Let's be clear. They have a difficult job, and it's more difficult now than ever, with people wearing masks, with the budget pressure that we're all under. 97%, and we're not going to dig into data here, but just to be clear, 97% of reported theft crimes do not result in an arrest. So there's no way my office can prosecute those cases. But when police make an arrest and bring us an investigation, more often than not, we do file charges or take some action to intervene and hold the person who was arrested accountable. We can only work with the limited universe of cases that police bring us, and we do. And I'm proud of our numbers, and I'm proud of the diverse array of interventions that we take. In some instances, you mentioned Walgreens. We know that's a real challenge for the city, and we know that police have to prioritize serious and violent crimes in progress. So as a result, we've initiated an effort through my assistant district attorneys and through my investigators to work with Walgreens and other retailers that are being hit particularly hard when they have information that, for whatever reason, has not resulted in an arrest by the police department, to have my team go in, look at the evidence, and issue arrest warrants and actually initiate criminal cases so that we can bring people to justice and intervene with that sense of justice. I'm going to share a story about that with all of you in the link right now. It's a Mission Local news article about some of the proactive work that my staff have done on specifically that issue that you raised, Rabbi.
Thank you. And I appreciate that. Are you working it? How do you work with, how do you work with the police office? How do you make sure that you improve the relationship with the police department? And I guess, the flack comes upon you because you speak differently? What do you account for a lot of the brunt of the Walgreens and the CVS and the public urination all being sort of shoveled onto your doorstep? Like, what do you make of that? And why do you think that is? Is it because you speak differently than previous DAs, or is it another reason?
The risk of trying to explain finger pointing and blame is, this is something that we've seen in our history as Jews. People have blamed us for things, whether it's in Nazi Germany, whether it's in, under the Tsar in Russia, you name it. People have blamed us, our people, our communities, for things which generally are totally out of our control. Now, of course, as district attorney, it's my job to make the city safer. I've been in office 14 months. During those 14 months, everything about our life has changed in radical ways that are totally out of my control. Crime has changed. Policing has changed. Our courts have shut down. I'm in an office you see behind me that's barely decorated, and we don't have books on the shelves. I've barely been able to come into my office in the 14 months since I was sworn in. Now, I'm not saying that to ask people to feel sorry for me. I'm just pointing out the objective facts of what we've been up against. Now, despite those challenges, overall reported crime in San Francisco is down by double digits. Now, people don't always like change. People often fear change. And given the anxiety and the tremendous challenges that we're facing, including ongoing challenges around public safety and around certain categories of crime that have gone up, that are understandably a focus of public attention, people are looking for somewhere to point the finger. They're looking for a scapegoat. They're looking for someone to blame. And I'm new.
Let me read to you this note that I got from a current that she heard that we were having this conversation. She writes, many citizens feel Boudin is a danger to the city of San Francisco, as it's evidenced by the most recent heinous crimes on innocent citizens by people who are well known to the DA's office. The DA espouses that crime has gone down in the city, but crimes such as burglary, car theft, and arson, she writes, have actually increased significantly, even when the population of the city has decreased because of COVID. She writes, security company vans are parked on our residential streets daily for installation of security cameras and alarm systems into many of homes because residents know the dangerous level of lawlessness on the streets right now. A handful of neighbors, including our local supervisor, have had perpetrators enter their homes, even though the home was occupied during that time. So I think a lot of us really connect with your talk about mercy and seeing everyone created in the image of God. But I guess, how do we reconcile the value for mercy and to see everyone created in the divine image? And of course, the belief that people have the capacity to do teshuvah and to grow, while also balancing that with the need for the rest of us to feel safe when we're at home and in our communities.
Those are things we have to balance, and we do. We balance them in my office by filing criminal charges when the police bring us enough evidence to do so. And then once we've filed those charges, finding ways to do justice, to be compassionate while holding people accountable. That's what we do. That's our job. If you look at San Francisco crime trends and you compare San Francisco to other cities that, like San Francisco, have been devastated by the pandemic, but that have a traditional prosecutor, one who didn't just take office and who believes in the kinds of failed tough on crime policies that some of my critics are advocating for. You can see very similar crime trends. Look across the Bay to Oakland, where homicide rates and gun violence rates are up over 200% year to date, far more than any change in crime we've seen in San Francisco, where armed robbery rates are actually up, whereas robbery rates in San Francisco are down. Look, I want to be clear. We have problems with public safety in this city, and we are working diligently with our partners, with the police and with the Board of Supervisors to address them. But these are not problems that are unique to my administration or to San Francisco. In fact, if you compare our crime trends under my administration with San Jose, Oakland, or other big cities across the country, we are doing far better than other cities. We're not doing good enough, and we're going to continue to strive to improve public safety. But San Francisco is safer than Oakland. Its crime rates overall have gone down, despite the fact that we hear about crime in the news a lot, and that our streets feel less safe.
Yes. I think that's it. I think the streets feel less safe and people feel, I mean, so what might you say? We have almost 60 people who are gathered here. What might you say to most San Franciscans? What would you say to them who somehow feel less safe with you as the DA than they did previously?
Well, I would say, look at the big picture, right? I'm one small piece of a bigger puzzle. The pandemic has changed far more about our daily lives than I can or have possibly ever do in a lifetime of work, right? Public safety is more complicated than just a district attorney's office. I cannot prosecute people unless and until the police make an arrest. Now, police make arrests in about 10% of reported crimes in San Francisco. So 90% of the time, there's nothing for me or my office to do to intervene. I'm not saying that as a criticism of the police. It's just an objective part of the job. It was true before I took office. It will be true after I leave office. Everyone wants a quick fix. They want a place to point the finger or someone to blame for our anxiety and frustration. I understand that. I'd like a quick fix as well. But the problems we're seeing in San Francisco today are not unique to San Francisco, and they're not problems that are a result of any one policy or government agency. They're a result primarily of deeply rooted racism, white supremacy, xenophobia, discrimination, as well as, of course, most principally, the COVID pandemic and what that's done to our streets. Our streets feel less safe, Rabbi, because they're abandoned, because they're empty. Because when one of us walks down the street, instead of seeing our neighbors, people coming and going to restaurants or work, what we see primarily is people who don't have homes. The people who have homes are in them, and the streets therefore feel far less safe to the rest of us.
Thank you. Thank you for that answer. I'm going to ask one more question, and then I'm going to open it up for some questions from those gathered. You refer to yourself as a Rodef Shalom, which means someone who pursues peace, which is beautiful. And I love, I see someone is there. That's okay. Saying hi to someone behind.
Oh, that's my wife. Right? My wife's just arrived at the office. I mentioned her earlier. You can.
Hello. Hello. Well, tell her welcome to shul for us.
Okay, she can hear you. She can hear you.
So
it's a pleasant surprise. Maybe she can help me finally decorate, because as you can see, that's not something we've had time to do in my first 14 months working from home.
So you mentioned that you're a Rodef Shalom, someone who pursues peace. So we're Congregation Beth Sholom. So we're the congregation that tries to create peace. And we believe that peace is created by communicating with each other, by having dialogues, by being sometimes uncomfortable, but by still acknowledging that we're all in community and we're all trying to create peace. So I guess it's interesting for me that you didn't say you were a Rodef Tzedek, which I just would have assumed a district attorney would say they're the pursuer of justice. Instead, you define yourself as a Rodef Shalom. And my last question is, why?
Peace is safety. Peace is justice. You know, the chant that we've all heard at marches and rallies and events where we come together to demand justice is no justice, no peace, right? No justice, no peace. So if we want justice, we need to build peace. And when we do that, when we break down barriers between our communities, when we eliminate xenophobia and discrimination and hatred and intolerance, that is how we find truly just and truly safe communities. I aim to be a Rodef Shalom by pursuing reforms that promote racial and economic justice, that center crime survivors, and that protect public safety. I believe that we will find justice when we have safety, and we will have safety when we have peace in our communities. I think that, as we see oppression and suffering and bigotry all around us, as we are coming out of, in the wake of these mass shootings and of unprecedented xenophobia and discrimination against members of our community who are vulnerable because of their identity in many cases, it is more important now than ever to retain our history as Jewish people and remember the suffering of our forefathers and foremothers, what they endured in the past, as well as more recent attacks. We have to remember that identity, that there, but for the grace of God, go we, go us. We have to hold on to these so that we don't become complacent, and also so that we can be good allies to the groups that are bearing the brunt of oppression and discrimination around us today.
Thank you, DA Boudin. I want to open it up now. So if Lily, if you could tag Geraldine Gelt, a member of our board, would like to ask a question. So if Geraldine, you can unmute yourself, and if maybe you could be tagged for the question.
Hello. Thank you for taking the time to join with us today, District Attorney Boudin. You know that domestic violence is being called the shadow pandemic because of the rise in the number and complexity of cases due to sheltering in place. Survivors living with their abusers with very little resources to leave. And as you, I hope, are aware, this scourge happens just as frequently in the Jewish community as it does everywhere else. So I'm wondering what your office is doing to deal with the perpetrators of domestic violence.
Thank you for that question and for raising a critical issue, as you say, during the pandemic and during shelter in place. This is an area where I actually am really proud of the work we've done as an office. We responded immediately when the shelter in place order first came down over a year ago now by coming up with a wide range of pilot projects and partnerships with nonprofits, with corporations, and with other city agencies to protect the most vulnerable victims, the ones stuck at home with their abusers, whether victims of domestic violence or of child abuse. We know that the usual safety mechanisms, things like mandatory reporting by teachers at schools or by people who would leave the home and be able to go seek help when their abusers weren't around, those safety valves were cut off because of shelter in place. And so starting a year ago, we partnered with other agencies, with Airbnb, with Veritas Real Estate Investments, with other city agencies to come up with emergency housing, both short-term, medium-term, and longer-term furnished apartments for victims of domestic violence who needed to find a safe place off the streets and away from their abuser. We were able to place dozens of vulnerable women and children through those programs. We also partnered with Lyft to provide safe, free, and discreet transportation for survivors of sexual assault or domestic violence who needed to get away from their abusers and either to the hospital or to a place of refuge. In addition, we've continued to hire and attract talent to help us expand and improve our prosecution of these cases. I'm really proud of, for example, one hire that I made early in my administration of a domestic violence advocate and expert prosecutor. We brought her to San Francisco from another county where she was leading not only domestic violence prosecutions there, but also trainings across the state, helping new prosecutors understand the particular challenges and legal issues that come up in domestic violence cases. And she's now in a grant-funded position in our office, focusing on high lethality cases, cases where there's signs that domestic violence could lead not just to violence, but to death. Those cases are and will always be a priority for me in my office. And I'm tremendously proud of the creativity and innovation in our efforts to both support victims during this unprecedented pandemic and also to continue holding those who cause harm accountable.
Thank you, Geraldine. A very important question. And Geraldine is also on the board of Shalom Bayit, and I'm on the Rabbinical Advisory Council, as is Rabbi Russell, which works towards those who are the victims of violence in the Jewish community. The next question, Bert, if you can unmute yourself here. Bert is a regular. He's here every Wednesday. So DA, the question will be a hard one. I can promise you that much.
Before I get to my hard question, thank you, DA, for joining us. My question, I'm not going to change it, but I might amplify a little bit, is do you have guidelines for who you will prosecute, who you choose to prosecute, who or how or what crimes, and can you let us know what they are? And the part B is, do the police know them, and does this affect the way the police act? I get from what you're saying in part, well, I can't prosecute people because the police aren't arresting them. I've heard a lot of police spokesmen say, well, we don't arrest people because the DA won't prosecute them. That's sort of my question.
Thanks for the question, Bert. Yeah, we do have guidelines and policies, but basically, with very few exceptions, if a crime is committed and the police bring us evidence that the crime was committed, we will file charges. There's very few categories of crimes that we won't prosecute. The only things that across the board we won't prosecute are crimes of pure poverty, crimes where someone's only offense is, for example, being homeless. But other than that, I mean, whether it's something as simple as misdemeanor shoplifting or something as serious and irreparable as murder, we file those charges. As I said, we filed over 5,000 new criminal cases since I took office, despite court closures, despite all of the changes in how we do business working from home. I know that a lot of people hear police say the DA won't prosecute, but let's be clear, they said that about my predecessor, and they said that about his predecessor. They said that about our current Vice President, Kamala Harris, when she was the district attorney. Police are frustrated, understandably, that sometimes people they arrest commit new offenses. But that is not a result of a decision by me or anyone else not to prosecute. It's a reflection of the failing of the criminal justice system. Even people who we send to state prison get rearrested. We may just delay the inevitable. 2/3 of people coming out of jails and prisons will be rearrested across the state. That is not unique to me or to San Francisco. So the answer to that allegation is it's a lie. You can look at the evidence, you can look at the data, you can look at what my lawyers are doing all day, every day. We prosecute the majority of cases that police bring us. And when we don't, it's because there's a missing piece of evidence or because the interests of justice require a different approach to a traditional prosecution. And we do all kinds of things like neighborhood courts, like diversion programs, like mental health referrals, depending on the particular facts. But if there's a case, Bert, where you or someone you know is a victim of crime, please email me the police report number. 90% of the time, the police don't make an arrest in reported crimes. In the 10% of the time when police do make an arrest, my office will file charges more often than not. That's just the facts. That's what the data shows.
Thank you, Bert, for the question. I think a good follow-up question would be Raf. Raf, if you could unmute yourself here. I think that your question in terms of we have these different rifts going on. Raf, I think your question would be a good follow-up.
Sure. Thanks again, DA Boudin. And I think just a quick kind of nod to the conversation and the middle ground that we wanted to hold. Like I've learned a lot, and there's been so much friction and animosity, and you know the headline kind of heat on you is, you know, makes yourself into quite a figure, and it's hard to approach sometimes. So thank you. I mean, so my question, which you may have kind of looked at, has to do with kind of what you want the community, what you wish the community would be doing more of. So, you know, we hear your point about seeing the bigger picture, and there's a lot that I've learned in this session in just like how the DA's office operates in the city family and what your role is and where your limitations are. I think that's going to go pretty far. But what else? Like, what else do you wish that we as residents, constituents, and maybe there's a kind of flavor of this that's kind of Jewish constituents, what should we be doing? And it could be really tactical, like stop calling certain things in, stop feeding Twitter, or do more of some of the things.
Well, yes, I think Twitter is sadly a really toxic space. I think, we saw former President Trump use it in ways that explicitly promoted both misinformation and racism. And so that's a problem. There's a tremendous amount of misinformation. I would say that the main thing to do, well, let me give you two things. First of all, no, three. So I'm going to give you three things. First of all, don't be shy. If you have questions, if you have concerns about policies or specific cases, reach out to me. I am very accessible. I will write back to your emails immediately. I will look into the case that you're concerned about, and I will make sure you understand what my office is doing and why, every time. Second of all, if you see a crime, if you're a victim of crime, please report it. We need crimes to be reported so that police can investigate, so that my office can take action to hold people who commit crime accountable. If you don't report it, or if the police don't investigate it, there's no way I can do anything about it. In fact, I don't even know about it. And the third thing is, as you think about your views, whether it's on me or on any other elected official or public policy issue, please take the time to understand the facts. There is so much disinformation and confusion about who does what and why. Before we form opinions, we cannot simply rely on a tweet or a next door post or even a headline in the local newspaper. We have to educate ourselves. That is something that I think as Jewish people, we know from our history, sadly has not always been done about us. And it has resulted in devastating consequences and prejudices. Please don't fall prey to that mistake. Take the time, arm yourself, empower yourself with information. And if you have questions or doubts or concerns, ask me. I'm very accessible, and I look forward to hearing from all of you.
Thank you, Boudin. I think you coming here and addressing our questions and participating in our robust Talmudic back and forth is a real sign of accessibility, whether or not we agree or disagree with your approach. I don't think anyone here, we appreciate very much you participating in this conversation. I want to go now to the president of our congregation, Ellen Ginsberg, who has a question she would like to ask.
Hi, thanks so much for being with us today. My question, you talked earlier about using your office to advocate for change, and you also talked about the limits of the mandate of your office. And so I'm wondering what, how you, given those limits, what you hope to achieve with the advocacy, and maybe a kind of a connected question is, what changes that might be outside your mandate that you think are critical that need to be made in the city to realize the vision of justice that you've discussed here?
Well, thank you, Madam President, if I may. The truth is that as effective as I want my office to be in presenting evidence to judges and jury, right? At the end of the day, our core function as trial lawyers is to present evidence and let juries decide what happened, and then judges can impose punishment as appropriate. The best crime is one that we prevent. And so when I think about your question and what I can do and what we need other agencies across the city to do, is we need to find ways to prevent crimes before they occur. Right? If we wait until someone is harmed, especially in a violent crime, no matter what I do, no matter what charges I file, no matter what conviction or sentence I secure, in many ways it's too late. And so what I want my office to think about when we do prosecute a case, and what I want my partners in city government, whether it's the mayor or the board of supervisors or the Department of Public Health or our community-based leaders, our religious leaders, to think about is how can we prevent crimes from occurring? Because as much as we support victims through restitution and therapy and counseling and all of the different services that my office provides, as much as we will continue to do that, we are all better off when we don't have a victim of crime in the first place. So when we intervene, when we hold someone accountable, it always must be with an eye towards breaking the cycle, preventing the future crime. And when we think about the factors that motivate crime in the first place, I want to be clear, this is not a legal justification or an excuse for people who cause harm. This is about good public policy. It's also about being peacemakers. It's also about doing justice. And when we think about those things, we have to think about them from the framework of what are the root causes of this behavior, right? What are the root causes? Because someone who commits a crime based on mental illness cannot be treated the same as someone who commits a crime based on hatred or avarice. Those are different motivations and they require different reactions if we expect and hope to prevent a crime from occurring in the future. That's what I want and need to work in partnership, hand in hand with other city agencies to accomplish. Our jail is the #1 provider of mental health services in the city. That's not smart. That's not compassionate. That's not tikkun olam. We are not going to heal the world, much less the mentally ill, if our primary place of treatment is a jail cell. So those are examples of ways we need to work together so that my office has the tools and the partners we need to build safety in the long term for all of us.
Thank you, DA. We have time for one more question. And I think it's come up in a few of the questions here. It's about restorative justice and juvenile justice. Ellen, if you could just unmute yourself. I think a few people had your question, and this will be the last question for the DA. And by the way, the DA is accessible. So email Kelsey, email the DA the questions that we didn't have the opportunity to get to. Ellen.
Thank you. Well, I just wanted to hear a little bit more about the DA's office work on restorative justice, especially around, juvenile justice. And, I'm also thinking about how many, youth who are committing crimes are also victim of crimes themselves. So I'm interested to hear more about how you work to support youth to get back on the right track.
Thank you for the question. Let me just say for folks who aren't familiar with restorative justice, I think there's a lot of misinformation out there about what it is and what it isn't. For me, restorative justice is a victim-centered approach that empowers victims and gives them choices in how their case will be handled. And as much as I would like to expand restorative justice, and when I say that, I mean expand the number of victims that we offer it to as an option, because it empowers them and puts them at the center of the process. I'm really disappointed that one of the things COVID has prevented us from doing is expanding restorative justice. That's something that I hope to do more of in the years ahead. We've done very, very little, sadly, in my first year in office. But one area, to your question, where we have done it is in our juvenile justice division. What we've seen, and this actually predates my tenure, though we've expanded it since I took office, is when a juvenile, a child, is arrested and accused of a crime, if we ask the victim, would you like to engage in a restorative justice process, or would you prefer to engage in a traditional prosecution approach? We found two really important things. And this is years of data with outside researchers looking at a blind study. Two things. First, the vast majority, and I mean nearly 100% of victims prefer restorative justice approaches to jailing children. Second, and this is critical from the public safety standpoint, the long-term outcomes for the individuals, for the children who we are prosecuting, are better when we go through restorative justice. And when I say better, I mean they are less likely to be rearrested. That tells me that if we can model and expand and replicate carefully, slowly, deliberately, always putting victims first, always empowering victims to have a say, that we can build a model that is more compassionate and also more rooted in safety than the one that I inherited.
Thank you to DA Boudin. I would say that on the eve of Passover, this was quite a Seder that we had here. All of us were welcome to ask our questions, to participate in a robust conversation. We all don't have to agree, but what we learn on Passover is who ultimately is the wicked child. The wicked child is the one who refrains from participating in the conversation, who leaves the table and says, I'm not going to talk, I'm not going to engage. And so I want to thank all of you here. I want to thank the DA for sitting at our table, for participating in this conversation, for engaging in the type of robust, difficult conversation that this community is known for, and at the same time holding that sacred middle so that we can pursue a little bit of holiness and, God willing, more peace in our world. Thank you again. I want to wish everyone a Chag Sameach, a happy Passover, and I look forward to you joining us again. We'll be here again next Wednesday. We're here every Wednesday at noon. Thank you again, and take care.
Thank you so much. Stay safe.